Welcome to Age of the Geek, where we dive into TV and film and take a look at these projects through nerd vision goggles. We are your hosts. I'm Quigs, and this is Dave.
Hello there.
So this week we are talking about Thor Love and Thunder. What are your thoughts on the movie?
I really liked it. I would give it a solid B. I enjoyed the movie. I didn't like it as much as I was hoping I was going to like it because Thor Ragnarok is probably my favorite Marvel movie.
Thor Ragnarok is good. Personally, I love the Guardians of the Galaxies movies better, but if you're going for pure comedy, I think Thor Ragnarok is pretty good.
See, I actually feel like it's kind of the other way around for me. If you're going for pure comedy, Guardians is great. But for me, Thor Ragnarok is just my favorite. Endgame might be my favorite. It's between those two. Those are my top two for sure. But that's the thing is like it's so high up there, and I have absolutely loved every single thing that I've ever seen that Taika Waititi has written and directed. I think he is someone that just does an excellent job at handling humor, at handling serious topics as well. And I say that ahead of time because I think he does less good than usual in this movie at mixing humor and serious conversations.
I think that your grade, in my opinion, is a little too high. I would probably put this more at like a C because it just kind of misses the mark sometimes. And I think it might be because of that jarring trying to mix comedy with like, oh no, here's a serious moment. Oh, just kidding. It's a comedic moment. And like they don't mesh very well. And I do think this is a little weaker. And I've seen him tackle bigger things before.
He didn't find the right stuff in this one. The elements are there, but he didn't get that glue in the right position, and it just feels a little off. I think there's some really funny stuff, and I think there's some really emotional stuff that almost works.
Maybe you're right. Maybe it is that just barely missing the mark that leaves that kind of bittersweet taste in my mouth after watching the movie. And then I actually went and watched it again with my wife, and even my wife was like, it wasn't the strongest Marvel outing.
To be fair, I will say that I don't think Marvel has really been doing all right in general since Endgame.
Spider-Man No Way Home was pretty good. That really blew some big numbers for them since Endgame.
Sure, sure. If you're talking financially, I'm not talking financially. I'm talking, don't get me wrong, I love No Way Home, but it's not even my favorite Spider-Man movie, let alone my favorite Marvel movie.
No, it's not my favorite Spider-Man movie either. But you're right. Yeah, since Endgame, they've been hurting a little bit, trying to find their way with this new Phase 4.
And I think this kind of falls in that same regard. I still have faith in Taika Waititi, just one little misstep. And honestly, his misstep would be still a solid outing for several other writers and directors. It's just I expect so much of him because he has just done such amazing work that this just missed the mark a little bit. But I still enjoyed it. I still had a good time. I thought it was still good. It just wasn't my favorite.
Dave, you want to give us our synopsis?
Yeah, sure. After helping bring back half the universe, Thor is wandering the galaxy with the Guardians until he hears about someone killing gods. He heads out to investigate, and after finding an injured Lady Sif, they return to New Asgard, finding it under attack by Gorr the Godkiller. Jane Foster appears and has the power of Thor. Together, they force Gorr the Godkiller to retreat, but not before kidnapping the children of New Asgard. Jane, Thor, and Valkyrie hunt him down, and he nearly defeats the three of them, but they manage to escape, not without losing Stormbreaker, the key to eternity, where Gorr can make a wish to kill all gods. Thor and Jane return to defeat him, but he still manages to make it to eternity first. Thor convinces him to wish for something else, and he wishes for his daughter to come back to life. Both Jane and Gorr die, and Thor adopts the daughter, and they are known as Love and Thunder.
First and foremost, when the movie opens and you see Gorr walking through the desert with his daughter and she dies, that's when I thought, oh man, is is this movie going to be similar to Doctor Strange in the sense where it just goes really deep and dark? Then it just got crazy from there. I mean, that whole first opening thing with Gorr was awesome. And I was a little disappointed that there actually wasn't more of him in the movie.
I know. I think one of the weakest parts of this movie is the fact that Gorr is barely in it. Why don't we ever see Gorr kill any gods?
Right. So I think you might watch this guy too, but on YouTube, I watch this guy who does pitch meetings for movies. And in the pitch meeting, he'll, poke some jabs at movies and stuff. And then as he's playing, the person who's pitching the script and the leader of the company, whatever company it may be, in this case, it was Marvel. And he goes, oh, yeah. And so then Thor goes to the city of the gods. And the guy's like, oh, that would be a great scene for Gorr to show up in. He's like, oh, no, 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 we're not going to have Gorr in there at all. And he's like, what? I agree with him. I think that would have been a great scene, a great action scene to have Gorr in there instead of kind of like a yawner of Thor and Valkyrie and Jane and Korg beating up some random minions.
Even before that, like when Thor first gets turned on to Gorr in the first place, we don't see Lady Sif fight Gorr. We don't see Gorr kill all these different gods. We're just told he did it.
All of it happens off screen. All of these thousands of gods that have gotten killed. And it's like the time jump is just crazy.
This movie would have been made so much better with just 10 extra minutes, which it's a very short movie too. It's like only 2 hours. If it just had 10 extra minutes interspersed in the beginning where Gorr is killing different gods, I think that would have made this movie significantly better than it was. I don't really understand why they didn't put more Gorr fighting gods in there.
Or even just have him come and massacre some gods at Omnipotent City and then have Jane and Thor and the rest narrowly escape and saying, oh, hey, if he's here, we can go save the kids. And then they go and try to save the kids and it's a trap. Somehow Gorr makes it back before them or something. I don't know. It's Marvel. Who cares? I have a friend, he kind of described Marvel movies, and I might butcher it and I'll hear about it later, but he's like, Marvel movies are kind of like a pizza. Sometimes you might get a really, really good pizza. And sometimes you might just get an okay pizza. But at the end of the day, it's a pizza. You can't go wrong. And I feel like that's kind of the case with this movie. It's not a really great gourmet pizza, more like cardboard with cheese on it. It's a pizza. It'll do.
There are definitively worse Marvel movies for me. I understand what you're saying. I definitely think this misses the mark in a lot of ways, sadly. I had a lot of high hopes for it too. And maybe my hopes were just too high because of how good Ragnarok was and how good Taika Waititi has done that I did not like it. It missed the mark for me.
And maybe this is Marvel fatigue talking, but it felt to me like just standard Marvel fare.
I don't believe in things like Marvel fatigue or Star Wars fatigue. I think if people are going to make consistently excellent product, you're going to like it. You're not going to be fatigued by it. You're not going to be worn out if it's consistently great, right? Stranger Things, I heard a lot before season 4 came out, like, oh, I've kind of over Stranger Things, etc. And then season 4 was amazing. And no one is saying that anymore, right? Everyone's like, oh, yeah, Stranger Things, this was amazing. But the reason that you hear fatigue is because people love these properties, but they're just not putting out quality stuff right now. So what do you think of Jane's story?
I'm a little confused about Jane's story. They try and retcon it a little bit by saying she can become Thor because Mjolnir was told by Thor when they were madly in love to always protect her. Now, I don't know how it came about in the comics, but I do know that in the comics for a while she was called Lady Thor because, from my understanding, in the comics, it technically was a title. I actually did some research with a friend here. Apparently, Thor was cast out of Asgard by Odin. His memory was erased, and he was put into a man called Donald Blake, who was this like paralyzed man who was going through med school.
That's the name that they give him in the first Thor movie, right?
Yeah, that is the name that they give him as his alter ego. However, he actually lived 10 plus years in the body of Blake and didn't know who he was other than that. Ended up becoming a doctor, helping children in hospital, that sort of thing. Odin decides, okay, so he's living a really good life, implanted a suggestion to go to Norway, where eventually Blake came into Thor's birthplace and found Thor's hammer and became Thor again. So he essentially is Donald Blake. And when he wields the hammer, he becomes Thor. So in the comics, it feels to me like that is a title. And so when Jane becomes Thor or Lady Thor in the comics, it's like a title is being passed on. So the thing that confused me in the movie was Thor is literally his name, and he's never really gone by anything but that. And all of a sudden, she's Thor too. It's his name, and it's just that whole thing kind of confused me a little bit.
I will agree that it never felt like a title in the movies, and so to call her Thor or to like reference her as a Thor just feels off to me for sure. But I could see people referring to her as Lady Thor because she's the love interest or whatever of Thor. But yeah, that definitely felt off to me. But I believe that they took this heavily, if not straight from the comics, but the whole cancer story with her and her going to Mjolnir because she feels this call. And I actually really liked the fact that the reason that she could wield the power is because Thor inadvertently put magic to those words years before. I really liked that. I agree with you that the whole calling her Thor feels weird, but the result it yields, I really enjoyed. And I think that worked for me, at least.
Don't get me wrong. Her as Thor was kind of cool. I liked how she clearly put a ton of work into getting in shape. Honestly, at some parts, and I think it's just because some of the CGI in the movie felt a little janky to me, but at times I did feel like they had just kind of photoshopped her head onto a bodybuilder.
No, but if you've seen like real pictures of her, she got buff. Yeah, I mean, all the CGI has been pretty lackluster since Endgame. I really liked Jane's story in general, other than the fact that she's called Thor. I thought her story was great. Not all of it worked only because, like we mentioned before, the meshing of the comedy versus the serious aspects did not mesh completely well. It sometimes felt very disjointed in that regard, but besides that, it felt really cool. I really liked the way that she wielded Mjolnir, that it would break apart into lots of pieces. Since last we saw it, Hela destroyed it. And so it's sitting there in all these pieces. And I love that while she's wielding it, it actually breaks apart and can hit several things and then come together. And one of the coolest scenes, the whole black and white scene in the shadow realm, I love that you could still see the blue lightning still came through, even though everything else was black and white. There are elements I liked of Zeus and elements I didn't like of Zeus. I liked the lightning bolt a lot. I liked kind of his over the top nature. I think that is one of the moments that the over the top nature of Taika Waititi really worked. But I also felt like there was some of the comedy with him that it didn't quite sit with me, but overall, I liked it.
Zeus was take it or leave it. Russell Crowe is not really known for his humor, and so it was odd to see him in that role. Obviously, he had fun with it, but it was odd to see him in that role. And that whole Omnipotent City scene where he flicks the clothes off as Thor, like when my wife wanted to go and see the movie, I mean, obviously it's Thor. He's the reason why she wanted to go see it. So I was lamenting this fact to my friends at work. I'm going to be the third wheel on my date. It's going to be my wife, Thor, and I'll be the awkward dude. And my friend was like, don't worry, man. He's got nothing on you except he's better looking. He's more muscular. He's got better hair. He's got more money. He literally plays a god on screen. But don't worry, you're fine. You're fine.
I mean, Chris Hemsworth's amazing. He's great. I don't even know what to say about him in this movie because he's the perfect person for this role from the beginning.
Especially with how they've been making him. Like he has progressively gotten dumber with each Thor movie.
I don't think he's gotten dumber. A lot of people say he's gotten dumber. He still does plenty of things, and when he gets serious, he gets serious. It's just he's sillier for sure. He's having more fun. When he gets serious, he gets serious. I don't buy into the whole he's gotten dumber. It hasn't seemed that way to me.
He definitely has, and they're just playing it off for the comedy at this point.
Yeah, but like, what does he do, in your opinion, that makes him feel dumber? other than his silly remarks.
Intentionally destroying the palace at the beginning for the people, and then just like brushing it off and trying to be all funny about it.
I don't know if I would say he intentionally destroyed it. I think he was careless.
Yeah, running into things, the speech that he gives to the Asgardians after the attack that Gorr planned and captured all their children, it's just falters. He's played for jokes.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. It never really bothered me, to be honest.
I mean, he does have his serious moments, like you said, but they're more like epic moments. Like, okay, this is his time to shine as a warrior. But everything other than that, he's just kind of like this awkward, bumbling oaf.
I like him as kind of an awkward, bumbling oaf, though. I mean, elements of that existed in the first Thor movie, and those were always the best elements of Thor. So they've definitely leaned into that a lot of ways as Thor has gone on. I mean, he had plenty of moments like that in Infinity War and Ragnarok. The only one that I feel like he was very serious in was the second Thor movie, which I think is by far the worst.
No, it's true. I do think there needs to be some levity to him.
To add to the list of ways that Chris Hemsworth is better than you, he's funnier and has more charisma.
So now you can see easily why I have a little bit of a skewed perception about this movie. One really interesting thing that I thought was cool was most of the cast and crew got their kids involved in this movie, which is really cool.
Yeah, the girl who plays Gorr's daughter is Chris Hemsworth's daughter, right?
Exactly. And apparently his son, in the beginning when Korg is narrating, you see young Thor running through the forest. The little boy is his son as well.
Oh, cool. It did look a lot like him, so that makes sense.
Right. And apparently, I don't know which ones were theirs, but I know that Natalie Portman's children and Christian Bale's and one of Taika Waititi's daughters appeared in the film.
Yeah, I mean, they're probably all in the group of children that are kidnapped. That makes sense. Once you said that, I was like, oh, the most of them are going to be in that group because there's just a bunch of children, so they had to come from somewhere.
Yeah, here's the really cool thing. The way that the cast and crew really got their kids involved. Taika Waititi was writing the script and his kid came up and he was like, oh, I'm going to have these shadow monsters in there. Aren't these going to be really cool? And his kid was like, oh, yeah, that's really cool. And then he saw that his kid was drawing a picture of a shadow monster. He goes, that's a really good design. Is that what they should look like? And his kid's like, yeah, I think so. So he took it to the CGI people and they created a design for it. And Taika Waititi thought, you know what? This is awesome. And he went around to the cast and crew and had their kids draw pictures of monsters. So all of those shadow monsters in the film were drawn by the kids of the cast and crew.
So that is very sweet and cool. But I will say the shadow monsters, they're like barely a step up from smoke monsters to me. Formless, faceless monsters without intricate design. The way the Demogorgon is played in season 1 of Stranger Things is great, but just a formless, faceless amalgamation of monsters that are easy to take out and fight, etc. It just doesn't have the same weight, but it is a really sweet idea and cool that happened. It's nice, but I would have preferred something with a little bit more heft.
I hope they got paid a little bit for their artistics.
Speaking of the kids, I really liked Heimdall's son. I thought that was a really cool inclusion and a really cool way for Thor to be kept up to date on the kids and everything. I thought that was really interesting. And the way that he kind of was like teaching him how to use his powers, since we saw that relationship with Heimdall previous in several movies, and we saw him have that same connection with Heimdall in Ragnarok.
That was another thing that kind of was odd to me. So Marvel is not really known for their consistency with a lot of things. I think that Heimdall's son was one of those things. He pops up out of nowhere. I honestly actually didn't even remember that Heimdall had a son. So I was just kind of like, oh, this is random.
Well, I mean, they don't ever mention him before. It's not against consistency. It's just it was never mentioned before.
I haven't even gotten there yet. So first off, he just kind of pops off. Then Thor kind of teaches him really, really quickly how to reach out and pull him into like a vision quest or whatever so that he can talk to all the kids. So he has to kind of teach him how to do that. But then at the very end, Thor goes, oh, here, take my axe and just teleport everyone out. And all of a sudden his son just knows how to do that, even though he had to be taught how to do the vision quest.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the end where the kids all of a sudden have a bunch of abilities, that kind of definitely rubbed me the wrong way.
He made this big deal about we got to go and get gods to fight for us. We got to get this great army. Instead of saving these kids, I'm going to make a child army. What? That was a big inconsistency.
Yeah, I'll just give everyone the powers of Thor. Yeah, that was a little much for me. I'll agree. The other big thing that bothered me in the movie, so definitely the part where he gives all the kids his powers and everything. It didn't sit right with me. The other big thing that I didn't like was the Korg fake out death. I am sick of fake out deaths. I just feel like there's so many things now where like they try and fake you out with a death. I think that ever since Rise of Skywalker, anytime that you do like a quick death fake out and it's just immediately retconned completely, there's no repercussions or anything. I'm done.
Speaking of inconsistencies and deaths, at the very end of the movie, Jane gives up her life to save Thor and change Gorr's mind with the power of love, which in some movies, if you can pull that off, it can work really, really well. But I just threw up in my mouth a little bit that they just tried to pull that off at the very end of that movie.
It worked for me. I liked it.
If they're at the edge of eternity, is it like a one wish only deal? Why couldn't Thor be like, oh, hey, cure my girlfriend's cancer, or keep her alive?
They said in the beginning that whoever is the first person to reach eternity, only they get to make a wish.
Okay, so it's a one and done, and no one else can make a wish now.
Based on the dialogue previous in the movie, that is how I understood it.
I guarantee you that consistency will be broken in a future movie.
Probably not. Marvel also has a history of introducing stuff and then just pretending it never exists.
So Thor finds Sif on the battlefield and she's missing an arm. And he's like, maybe your arm's in Valhalla, but you can't go there because you didn't die in battle. Jane shows up in Valhalla. At the end of the credits, I'm thinking to myself, well, how did she get into Valhalla if she didn't die in battle? The battle was over by the time she got there. I guess an argument could be made that maybe Thor didn't know how to get into Valhalla, but he's the son of the god of that religion.
Honestly, to me, you're being a bit nitpicky. To me, it all made sense that she would end up in Valhalla. I agree it was a little bit of a weird conversation with Lady Sif, but I think that the end of the movie worked. Other than the children getting the powers of Thor, I think the end of the movie worked. And I think that it made sense for her to go to Valhalla. And I think that was a fitting conclusion to her story.
I think they could have made that better and more feasible to me and funnier if they included a bit with Sif's arm in Valhalla as well.
Oh, yeah, that would have been great. If Jane shows up before she sees Heimdall, she just sees Sif's arm on the ground. Yeah, that would have been hilarious. And that's very consistent with Taika Waititi's humor. So I'm surprised that he didn't do that. It's probably because it's a Marvel movie. They didn't want to show a severed arm. I'm sure Taika Waititi would have been all for it, but I wonder if something like that got nixed by studio heads or something, right? I mean, it took forever for Star Wars to start cutting off limbs. That only started happening in Obi-Wan. Ever since Disney bought it, they haven't cut off any limbs. The fact that the line is there makes me wonder if Taika Waititi intended, because that's so consistent with his humor. But I just don't see Disney people being okay with a severed arm. Seeing somebody with a missing arm is one thing, but seeing the actual severed arm, I think, is the part where I think Disney would be like, oh, and that's total speculation. From previous experience, I feel like Disney would not be okay with that.
Some of the jokes were kind of done to death. Korg narrating was funny the first time, funny the second time, but kind of got old the third time.
I think the Korg narration really just should have been for the beginning and the end. I don't think it should have been done multiple times after that. Opening up the movie with the Korg narration and closing the movie with the Korg narration totally worked. But the middle Korg narration stuff, it was too much. I was a little disappointed in Korg in this movie. I feel like he was there just because Taika Waititi is the voice of Korg. He didn't really play a role, and he had the fake out death. I just was kind of done with Korg in this movie, honestly. I really don't think he worked.
Yeah, he was a highlight of Ragnarok.
Oh, for sure.
But in this movie, he wasn't really.
Yeah.
And then the goats. So when the goats were first introduced, maybe the second and third time, they kind of screamed, freaking hilarious, because it made sense. But then it just kind of got old.
Yeah, I guess that's to each his own. I still enjoyed it. I didn't mind that they kept screaming every time you saw them, especially that time they run into the planet.
Yeah, that was worth it. That was funny. But that was also the 7th or 8th time. One of the writers must have seen Screaming Goat videos from 2010 and got super excited about it.
Well, doesn't Thor have goats in mythology?
I don't know. I'm not that kind of geek.
The whole goats pulling a boat is from Norse mythology.
It very well could be. They really leaned into the whole God thing in this movie, which would have been interesting to see more God on God action.
I know, yeah, that's what this movie's missing is they needed a little bit of some refinement of the humor to the serious moments, and they needed more gore killing gods. Give us the action. But otherwise, I'll happily watch it again when I get the chance. It was definitely a disappointment, only because of how good Ragnarok was, and just how good Taika Waititi normally does on his movies. It's probably the weakest movie I've seen from him, but I still enjoyed the movie.
Quoting my friend from earlier, it was a pizza. It was something. It might not be the best of foods, but it gets the job done in a pinch. I'm looking forward to the next few Marvel movies, which I hope will advance some more of the plot of Phase 4.
I'm really not looking forward to the Marvel movies right now. I mean, I'll keep going and see them, but we need something to actually advance the major plot. It just feels like we're just in stagnation since Endgame, Endgame was just such an amazing final note to what had been done. Nothing that they've made since has really justified the Spider-Man movies are probably the exception, but none of the other stuff has really justified its own existence.
I'm hoping for just some shred, even if it's kind of like what we got with some of the earlier Marvel movies with the end credits of teasing Thanos. I'm hoping for some shred of an idea of what's going to happen in Phase 4.
Yeah, give us a reason to care that this story is still going, right?
Right, exactly. All these solo films. Ragnarok was, I want to say Ragnarok and Guardians of the Galaxy were really strong kind of solo story outings. But even they had something to do with the overarching theme. I just want something meatier than what we got in Love and Thunder.
Marvel needs to do something because it's definitely losing its luster.
Unfortunately, yeah. So next time on Age of the Geek, we're going to take kind of a hard turn from, all of the not showing a severed limb and all the wholesomeness of Disney, I suppose, into The Boys Season 3. We'll be diving into that next time on Age of the Geek. Stay tuned for that. That'll be an interesting one. I don't know if I'm looking forward to it just to talk about it or looking forward to it to kind of get it out. So that's all for today's episode. Please subscribe, follow, and leave a review on whatever podcasting medium you use. And please check out our YouTube channel for additional content. Join us next week, and thank you for listening to Age of the Geek. So we're kind of new to